The photograph had been in Daniel Morrow's jacket pocket for so long that the edges had gone soft, the corners bent into permanent curves from years of being folded and unfolded in the dark. He took it out the same way he always did, slowly, like a man handling something that might shatter if he moved too fast. In the picture, a boy of about 5 years old sat on the back of a Harley-Davidson Softail, his tiny hands gripping the handlebars. His face split into the biggest grin Daniel had ever seen on a human being. The boy was wearing a miniature leather jacket that Daniel had ordered custom from a shop in Tucson, stitched with a small death head patch on the back. His name had been Marcus, and for the past 14 months, that jacket had been sitting folded in a cardboard box in Daniel's closet, because Marcus Morrow, age 6, had died from a seizure disorder that the doctors said they had never seen progress so fast in a child so young. That was what Daniel had been told. That was what Daniel believed. He stood in the cemetery the way he always did on Thursday afternoons, because Thursdays had been the day he and Marcus used to ride together. Just the two of them, down Route 89, through the high desert, where the red rocks turned gold in the late sun. He stood with the photograph in his hand, and nothing, because there was nothing left to say. He had already said everything a man could say to a piece of carved stone. The cemetery in Kingman, Arizona was not a fancy place. It sat on the western edge of town, where the land started to flatten out toward the Nevada border, and the wind came across the open desert without anything to slow it down. The graves were mostly simple, plain markers, a few plastic flowers faded by the sun, the occasional American flag planted by a veteran stone. Daniel had chosen this cemetery because Marcus had loved to watch the sunsets from this side of town, had always pressed his small face against the truck window when they drove past, and said it looked like the sky was on fire. Daniel wore his cut. He always wore it here, the black leather vest with the Iron Saints MC patches on the back, the club he had ridden with for 11 years. The Iron Saints were not the Hells Angels. They were a smaller charter out of Kingman, a tight group of 12 men who ran a legitimate shop during the day and rode together on weekends. They did charity runs for the Children's Hospital in Flagstaff every September. They had escorted Marcus to school on his first day of kindergarten, a dozen bikes lined up in front of the building, while the other parents stared. And the kids thought it was the greatest thing they had ever seen. Marcus had walked into that school like he owned it. Daniel pressed his thumb against the edge of the photograph and let the October wind move across the cemetery. He was not a man who cried easily. He had done most of his crying in the first 3 months, alone in his shop after closing, sitting in the dark with the bikes covered in their tarps around him. Now he just felt hollowed out, like something essential had been removed, and the space where it used to be had never properly filled. He was about to put the photograph back in his pocket when he heard footsteps in the dry grass behind him. He did not turn around. People sometimes walked through this section of the cemetery. He was used to sharing the space, but then a small voice said something that stopped every thought in his head completely cold. "Mister, that boy in your picture is not dead." Daniel turned around slowly. Standing about 5 feet behind him was a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, dark-skinned and small-framed, with 2 neat braids, and a pair of bright eyes that were looking at him, with an expression that was not afraid and not uncertain. She was wearing a yellow rain jacket that was slightly too big for her, the sleeves rolled up at the wrists. In one hand, she held a small bunch of wildflowers that looked like she had picked them from the side of the road on the way here. Daniel stared at her. He said nothing for a moment, because the sentence she had just spoken did not fit into any category of things people said to him in this place. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice coming out lower than he intended. "That boy in your picture," the girl said again, completely calm, "is not dead." She pointed at the photograph still in his hand. "I seen him before." Daniel looked at the photograph, then back at the girl. His first instinct was to tell her she was mistaken, that children sometimes confused faces, that grief did strange things to strangers who witnessed it, made them want to offer comfort, even when comfort had no logical foundation. But something in the way she said it stopped him from speaking those words. She had not said she thought she had seen him. She had said she had seen him. There was a difference, and something in Daniel Morrow's chest, some old mechanical instinct trained by years of reading people in difficult rooms, registered that difference immediately. "Who are you?" Daniel asked. "My name is Zoe," she said. She pointed toward the small maintenance building near the cemetery gate. "My daddy works here. He takes care of the grounds." She looked at the grave, then back at Daniel. "I come here after school sometimes." She paused, then said, "I've seen you before. You come every Thursday." Daniel said nothing. She nodded like she was confirming something she had already worked out. You always stand here a long time. You always have that same picture. Daniel felt something move through him that he could not name immediately. What do you mean you have seen him? He asked. Where? Zoe reached into the pocket of her yellow jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. My daddy told me that if I ever saw you again I should give you this. She held it out toward him. Daniel looked at the folded paper in her small hand for a moment before taking it. He unfolded it carefully. It was a printed photograph, slightly blurry, the way pictures look when they are taken on an older phone and printed on regular paper. It showed a small living room with a couch and a television in the corner. Standing in the middle of the room, wearing jeans and a blue shirt, holding a glass of orange juice with both hands the way small children do, was a boy. His hair was longer now, his face was thinner, but there was no question in Daniel Morrow's mind. None at all, not even a fraction of a second of uncertainty. It was Marcus. Daniel's hands began to shake. Not violently, just a fine tremor that moved through his fingers and up his wrists. He looked at the printed photo for a long time without speaking. Where was this taken? He asked, his voice barely audible over the wind. At our house, Zoe said. Her voice was still calm, still steady, the way children sometimes are when they are delivering news they know is important but do not fully understand the weight of. He has been living with us for almost 8 months. Daniel looked up from the photograph. 8 months. That's not possible, he said. My son died. There were hospital records. There was a death certificate. There was a funeral. He gestured at the grave behind him. His name is on that stone. Zoe looked at the grave, then back at Daniel with those steady, clear eyes. My daddy says names on stones do not always mean the person's is really there, she said. It was almost the same thing her father had told her to say, but the way she delivered it made it sound like her own wisdom, earned and certain. Daniel stared at her. He was a man who had built his life on instinct and on reading situations fast. He had ridden through 11 states, settled disputes in parking lots and courthouses, raised a son mostly alone after his wife left when Marcus was 2. He was not a man who was easily shaken. But standing in this cemetery with a blurry photograph in his shaking hands and a small girl in a yellow jacket looking at him without flinching, Daniel Morrow felt the entire architecture of the last 14 months begin to crack. He swallowed once. He looked at the photo again, the orange juice. Marcus always held his glass with both hands because Daniel had told him when he was 3 years old that drinks were not toys, and you used 2 hands so you did not spill. Marcus had never stopped doing it. He was still doing it in this photograph. 2 hands on the glass. I need to talk to your father, Daniel said. Zoe nodded. Yes, sir, she said. I figured you would. She turned and started walking toward the maintenance building near the gate. And Daniel Morrow, for the first time in 14 months, followed someone toward something other than grief. The man who came out of the small maintenance building was in his late 50s, broad-shouldered and deliberate in the way he moved. Like every step was a decision. He wore a gray work shirt with the cemetery name stitched on the chest, and he carried his work hat in his hands, turning it slowly by the brim the way men do when they are about to say something they have been carrying for a long time. His name was Raymond Briggs, and he had been the head groundskeeper at this cemetery for 19 years. He looked at Daniel and then at the photograph in his hand, and he nodded once, like a man confirming something he had already decided to confirm. Mr. Morrow, Raymond said. His voice was quiet and measured. I know who you are. I have watched you come here every Thursday for over a year. Daniel said nothing. He waited. Raymond looked at the grave with Marcus's name on it, then back at Daniel. I have been working with the dead for a long time, he said. I know what a coffin is supposed to weigh. He paused, letting that land. The coffin that was buried in that grave was too light. Significantly too light for a child, even a small one. Daniel's jaw tightened. You knew, he said. Raymond shook his head slowly. I suspected, he said. I did not know. The burial was arranged privately, paid in cash, closed casket. A man named Gerald Holt brought the paperwork. He said the family had requested a private service, and that the medical team had handled the remains separately. He said not to open the casket. Raymond looked at the hat in his hands. I am a man who does his job and does not ask questions that are not his to ask. But I never forgot that coffin. He looked back up at Daniel. Then 8 months ago, Zoe came home from school with a story about a boy who had moved in with her aunt down the street, a boy who kept saying his daddy rode motorcycles, and his daddy's name Daniel, and his daddy would come for him. Raymond reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, different from the one Zoe had given Daniel. He held it out. I wrote down what the boy has said. Different things over time. I kept notes. Daniel took the paper and opened it. The handwriting was careful and precise, dated entries going back 7 months. Boy says his father's name is Daniel Morrow. Boy says his father rides a black motorcycle. Boy says his father has a scar on his left hand from a shop accident. Boy says his father taught him how to check the oil on a bike. Boy says his father calls him Ace. Daniel stopped reading. His vision had gone slightly blurred, and he realized after a moment that his eyes were burning. Ace. He had called Marcus that since the boy was 3, after Marcus had walked into the shop one morning, picked up a wrench, and without being asked or shown, correctly identified every tool in the top drawer by name, because he had watched Daniel work for 2 years and memorized all of it. Daniel had said, "Well, you are a little Ace, aren't you?" And the name had stayed. No one outside of Daniel's immediate circle knew that name. Nobody, he said, his voice stripped down to almost nothing. Nobody outside the club knows that name. Raymond nodded slowly. That is why I kept the notes, he said, because it is not the kind of detail a child invents. Daniel looked at the grave with Marcus's name on it. He looked at the printed photograph in his hand. He looked at the list of notes in Raymond's handwriting. And then, with the cold clarity of a man who has just understood something that reorders everything he thought he knew, he asked the only question that mattered. Who arranged the funeral? Raymond met his eyes. The paperwork listed the next of kin, he said. A woman named Carol Morrow. Daniel went completely still. Carol Morrow was his sister. Daniel Morrow drove home from the cemetery without remembering the drive. He pulled into the lot behind his shop, Iron Saints Cycle Works, and sat in his truck for 11 minutes without getting out. He knew it was 11 minutes because he watched the clock on the dash without meaning, to the numbers changing while his mind worked through what Raymond had told him the way an engine works through a mechanical problem, systematically, without sentiment. Carol was 4 years older than Daniel. She had never approved of the shop, never approved of the club, never approved of the life he had built in Kingman after he came back from 2 years working in Phoenix following his divorce. She had offered twice to take Marcus when Daniel's wife left, had said that a child needed a stable home, and that a motorcycle shop was not a stable home. Daniel had declined both times, politely the first time, and less politely the second. He and Carol had not spoken much after that. When Marcus died, or when Daniel had been told Marcus died, it had been Carol who had called him. He had been in Flagstaff picking up parts for a customer's restoration when his phone rang. She had been crying, or sounding like she was crying, and she had told him that Marcus had had a severe seizure at the house, that she had been watching him for the weekend while Daniel was working, and that by the time the ambulance arrived, it was already over. She had told him the hospital had handled everything quickly because of the severity of the episode, and that the doctor had advised a closed casket for the family's well-being. She had organized the funeral. She had organized everything. Daniel had been too shattered to question any of it. He had stood at a graveside service with 12 members of his club behind him, and buried what he believed was his son, and he had spent 14 months coming back to that stone every Thursday and talking to it. And the whole time, he got out of the truck and walked into the shop. 2 of his guys were working, Priest, who was the club's road captain and best mechanic, and a younger prospect named Cole, who was still learning the ropes. Priest looked up when Daniel walked in and immediately put down the tool in his hand. He had known Daniel for 9 years, and he could read the man the way some people read weather. Something happened, Priest said. It was not a question. Daniel walked to the workbench and set the 2 photographs and Raymond's handwritten notes down side by side. He did not say anything. He just let Priest look. Priest was a former Army Ranger who had come back from 2 tours with a steady hand and an unshakable ability to assess information without flinching. He looked at the photographs for a long time. He read the notes. He looked at the grave photograph on Daniel's phone that Daniel pulled up without being asked. Then Priest stood up straight and said 3 words. "Tell me everything," Daniel told him. All of it, from Zoe in the cemetery to Raymond's testimony about the coffin weight to Carol's name on the burial paperwork. He said it all flat and factual, the way he would report a mechanical diagnosis, no extra emotion, no interpretation, just the sequence of facts. When Daniel finished, Priest did not speak immediately. He looked at the photograph of Marcus holding the orange juice with both hands. Then he looked at Daniel. "You cannot go to Carol yet," Priest said. "If she did this, and she did it deliberately, and you walk in there without proof, she burns the evidence, and you have nothing. You have a blurry photograph and an old man's memory about a coffin being light. That is not enough." Daniel nodded. He had already arrived at this conclusion in the truck. "I need more," he said. "You need everything," Priest replied. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his phone. He scrolled for a moment, then looked up. "You remember Harlan Webb?" Daniel nodded. Harlan Webb was a former private investigator who had done work for the club twice before, finding a stolen bike across state lines and locating a member's missing son from a bad custody situation. Harlan was methodical, discreet, and owed the club a favor from the second job. "I will call Harlan tonight," Priest said. "You go see the boy first, confirm it with your own eyes. Everything else comes after." Daniel looked at the photograph one more time. "Confirm it with your own eyes." The address that Raymond had written on the bottom of the notes page was on the east side of Kingman, a neighborhood of small houses with chain-link fences and mature trees that dropped dry leaves across the sidewalks in October. Daniel drove there in his truck, not on the bike, because the bike was too loud for what he needed right now, which was to arrive without announcement. He parked half a block down and walked. The house was yellow with white trim, small but cared for, a flower bed along the front that had been planted with intention. There was a wind chime on the porch that rang in the desert breeze. Daniel stood on the sidewalk outside for a moment. He was a man who had ridden into situations that most people would have turned around for: bar fights, interstate confrontations, circumstances where the outcome was genuinely unclear. But he had never felt the particular kind of terror he was feeling right now. Standing outside a yellow house that might contain his living son, he walked up to the door and knocked. A woman answered. She was in her mid-30s, heavyset, wearing a kitchen apron over her regular clothes, and she looked at Daniel, at his cut, at the Iron Saints patch on his chest, and she did not look surprised. She had been expecting him. "Raymond called me," she said. Her name was Diane, Raymond's niece, and she opened the door wider. "He is in the backyard," she said. "He is helping my son water the garden." She led Daniel through the house, which smelled like something good cooking, and had the comfortable disorder of a home, where children actually lived. Shoes by the door, a school bag on a chair, drawings held to the refrigerator by fruit-shaped magnets. They walked through the kitchen to the back door, and Diane pushed it open and stepped aside. The backyard was not large. A patch of grass, a raised garden bed along the fence, a rusted swing set in the corner. A boy of about 6 stood at the garden bed holding a green watering can with both hands, carefully pouring water along the base of a row of plants, while Diane's son, a few years older, gave instructions about which ones needed more. The boy with the watering can had longer hair than Daniel remembered. He was thinner. He was wearing jeans and a red hoodie. But when he turned slightly to ask Diane's son a question, Daniel saw his face in profile, and that was the end of every question, every doubt, every rational assessment. It was Marcus. Daniel put his hand on the doorframe. His legs felt disconnected from the rest of him. Diane looked at him and then at the boy, and she said quietly, "Marcus, honey, someone is here to see you." Marcus turned around and looked at Daniel. And what happened next was something Daniel Morrow would carry in him for the rest of his life, not as a memory exactly, but as something more like a physical sensation, the way you carry a scar. Marcus did not run to him. He went completely still, the watering can still in both hands, his face moving through something complicated and slow, like a person waking from a very long sleep and not yet sure if what they are seeing is real or still part of the dream. Then his lips moved, and he said one word, "Dad?" Daniel crossed the yard. He got down on one knee in the dry grass, and he opened his arms, and Marcus dropped the watering can and closed the distance between them, and Daniel held him so tightly that later he would wonder how the boy had breathed. Marcus was shaking, or Daniel was, or both of them were, and Marcus said into Daniel's shoulder, his voice muffled by the leather of the cut, "I knew you would come. I told everyone you would come. I said you just did not know where I was." Daniel could not speak for a moment. He held his son and said nothing, and the wind chime on the front porch rang in the afternoon wind. And Diane stood at the back door with her hand over her mouth. Finally Daniel said, voice rough and unsteady, "I am here now, Ace. I am here." Marcus pulled back slightly and looked at his father's face, with the direct, searching eyes that children use when they are trying to determine the full truth of a situation. "They told me you were too busy," Marcus said. His voice was careful, like he was quoting something he had memorized. "They said you had too much work, and you could not take care of a sick kid." Daniel kept his hands on Marcus's shoulders. "Look at me," Daniel said. His voice was steady now because it had to be. "Did you believe that?" Marcus thought about it honestly, the way he always did, never rushing to the comfortable answer. "No," he said finally. "I did not think you would just stop. You never stopped on anything before." Daniel felt something inside him break cleanly and quietly, and with a finality that was almost a relief. "You were right," Daniel said. "I did not stop. I just did not know where to look." He pulled his son back in and held him again, and over Marcus's shoulder he looked at Diane, who nodded at him once. a small acknowledgement that passed everything necessary between two people who understood what had just happened in this backyard. Then Daniel looked beyond the fence, beyond the quiet neighborhood, toward the direction of Carol's house on the other side of town, and his eyes went cold and focused and still. Something had been rearranged in him permanently. He had been a grieving father for 14 months. He was something different now. He was a father who knew the truth. And in Daniel Morrow's world, a man who knew the truth had exactly one obligation. He was going to act on it. That evening, Daniel sat at Diane's kitchen table while Marcus slept on the couch in the next room, exhausted in the way children get when a big emotion finally releases. Diane sat across from Daniel with 2 cups of coffee between them and told him everything she knew. Marcus had appeared in their lives 8 months ago through Raymond, who had brought the boy to Diane's house one evening, after finding him wandering near the cemetery gate, disoriented and feverish. He had been sick, a respiratory infection that had gone untreated, and Diane had spent the first week nursing him through it, with over-the-counter medicine and soup, and the kind of practical maternal authority that does not ask permission before it helps. He had not trusted her at first. He had barely spoken. But children heal faster than adults when they are given safety, and within 2 weeks Marcus had been eating at the table and sleeping through the night and following Diane's son around the house like a shadow. He had told them his name immediately. He had told them his father's name, the shop name, the street the shop was on. He had told them about the bikes in the club and a man named Priest who had a tattoo of a compass on his forearm. All of it had checked out when Raymond quietly looked into it, but the boy's story had been so extraordinary that Raymond had not known what to do with it at first. A child claiming to be the dead son of a local biker, a death certificate on record, a grave in the cemetery where Raymond worked. He had been careful. He had been slow. He had watched Daniel come to that grave every Thursday for months before he decided that the man he was watching was not a man who had done something wrong, but a man who had been wronged. He wrote the notes. He waited for the right moment. Zoe found it for him. Daniel listened to all of it without interrupting. When Diane finished, he looked down at his coffee cup for a moment, then asked, "Did he ever say how he ended up away from my sister's house?" Diane nodded. "He said a woman came to where he was staying with another woman he did not know. He said the 2 women talked for a long time, and then the first woman told him he was going somewhere new, somewhere that would be better for him. He said the first woman cried when she said goodbye. He said she hugged him very tight and told him to be a good boy. He did not understand what was happening." Daniel pressed his jaw together. "And the place they took him?" "A facility," Diane said. She chose her words carefully. "He described it as a place with white walls and rules about when you could go outside. He said there were other kids there, but he did not know any of them. He said after a few weeks he started to understand that no one was coming for him, so one morning when a door was left unlocked during a supply delivery, he ran. He was sick and he had no shoes, and he made it 4 blocks before Raymond found him." Daniel was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Thank you," not as a formal courtesy, as a complete sentence that contained everything he could not say more specifically. Diane looked at him steadily. "That boy talked about you every single day," she said. "Every day. Even when he stopped believing you were coming, he still talked about you. He told my son about every bike in your shop by model and year. He told him about a trip you took up to the Grand Canyon when he was 4. He told him that you made the best grilled cheese in Arizona because you buttered both sides of the bread." Daniel almost smiled. "You do have to butter both sides," he said. Diane nodded. "He told me that too," she said. They were quiet for a moment. In the next room, Marcus shifted on the couch and murmured something in his sleep. Daniel looked toward the doorway, then back at Diane. "I am not going to move him tonight," Daniel said. "He needs to sleep. But tomorrow I need to start putting this together properly." He looked at her. "I am going to need your help. And Raymond's." "Whatever you need," Diane said. She did not hesitate. "Whatever you need, Mr. Morrow." That night, Daniel called Priest from the parking lot outside Diane's house. He gave him the short version. "Marcus is alive. I have seen him. He is safe and sleeping." On the other end of the line, Priest was silent for 3 full seconds, which for Priest was equivalent to any other man breaking down completely. Then he said, "The whole club needs to hear this." "Not yet," Daniel said. "Not until we have the full picture. I do not want anything happening to Carol or Gerald before I have everything documented." Priest was quiet again. Then he said, "Harlan is already pulling records. Give him until morning." Daniel agreed. He drove home through the dark streets of Kingman, past the shop with its lights off, past the park where he had taught Marcus to ride a bicycle at age 4, past the diner where they had eaten pancakes every Saturday morning, past all the geography of a life that had been shut down 14 months ago and was now impossibly restarting. He sat in his house, which was too quiet and had been too quiet for over a year, and he took out the original photograph from his jacket pocket. The one from the cemetery, the boy on the Harley with the giant grin and the miniature leather jacket. Then he set it on the table next to the printed photograph from Diane's house, the boy in the red hoodie holding orange juice with two hands. He looked at both of them for a long time. He had stood at a grave for 14 months talking to a stone. His son had spent 8 of those months in a small yellow house 4 miles away, watering a garden and telling a woman he barely knew that his father made the best grilled cheese in Arizona. Daniel Morrow did not sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote down everything he remembered about the days surrounding Marcus's supposed death. Every detail, every timeline, every person who had been involved or adjacent, every conversation with Carol, every interaction with the hospital staff, everything about the funeral that had felt slightly wrong at the time, but that he had attributed to grief, distorting his perception. By the time the sun came up over the desert, he had 4 pages of notes, and a clarity about what had been done to him and to his son that was as cold and as permanent as carved stone. He made coffee. He called Harlan Webb. Harlan answered on the second ring, which meant he had been awake, which meant he had found something. "Talk to me," Daniel said. Harlan talked. The death certificate for Marcus Morrow had been filed by a doctor, Andrew Cheswick, a physician associated with a private clinic on the north side of Flagstaff. But Harlan had pulled the clinic's staff records and Dr. Cheswick had not been employed there at the time of the filing. His credentials had been used without his knowledge, borrowed from a previous administrative file, and inserted into a new record. The death had been listed as acute neurological failure following a seizure episode, which was vague enough to be almost impossible to challenge without a body to examine. There was no body. The funeral home that had handled the burial was a small operation called Clearwater Services, family-owned, and had processed exactly 1 burial in the past 3 years. It had received a payment of $6,000 in cash for a closed casket service, with no body viewing, no hospital transfer paperwork, and no witness signatures beyond Carol Morrow and her husband Gerald Holt. The children's facility where Marcus had been held, a place called the Sunridge Care Center outside of Prescott, had intake records listing Marcus under a modified name, Marcus Cole, guardian listed as Carol Holt, reason for placement listed as parental incapacity due to bereavement. Harlan paused here, and Daniel heard him take a breath. "There is a financial component," Harlan said. His voice was neutral in the way it went when he was about to say something that was worse than what came before. Daniel's wife, before she left, had set up a trust in Marcus's name from her family's estate. The trust was structured so that if Marcus died before age 18, the principal transferred to the next of kin, which with Daniel's absence from the document, meant it reverted to the Morrow family line. Carol was listed as the fallback executor. The trust value at the time of the fake death filing was $240,000. Daniel sat very still with the phone against his ear. $240,000, he said. Harlan confirmed it. The transfer was initiated 4 days after the death certificate was filed. It had not yet fully cleared because of a flag a bank administrator had placed on it for routine verification, a flag that had accidentally slowed the whole process down. Muncie was sitting in a suspended transfer account right now, Daniel said. Yes, Harlan said. Which means the transaction is still reversible with the right legal intervention. Daniel looked at the legal pad in front of him, at the 4 pages of notes, at the 2 photographs side by side. He saw the full shape of it now, not just a lie told in grief or panic, but a planned extraction, organized in advance, executed with documents and timelines, and a child who had been moved out of the way like an obstacle, rather than a person. They planned it before she called me, Daniel said. It was not a question. Harlan confirmed it anyway. Based on the timing of the documentation, yes. The clinic paperwork, the funeral home booking, the trust transfer initiation, all of it was set in motion before you received the call. You were in Flagstaff picking up parts when your sister called you. Daniel remembered that day with a precision that he had not been able to access before, everything sharp and cold. I was at the supplier's warehouse, Daniel said. I had been there about an hour. Marcus was at Carol's for the weekend. Harlan said nothing, because there was nothing useful to add to that. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. Then he opened them and looked at the desk and the notes, and the photographs and the cold desert light coming through the window, and he said, I need to go see my son. He will be awake soon. Harlan said, do not contact Carol. Do not contact the facility. Do not do anything that tells them you know. I am taking this to a contact at the county DA's office this morning. I need you to stay calm and stay visible and act like nothing has changed until I call you back," Daniel said. Understood.
He paused. Harlan, yeah.
Thank you. On the other end of the line, Harlan exhaled slowly. When I took that first job for your club 6 years ago, Harlan said, I figured I was going to be finding stolen bikes for bikers. He paused. Bring your boy home, Daniel. Daniel ended the call. He sat for one more moment in the silence of his house. Then he stood up, put the photographs in his jacket pocket next to the original one that had lived there for 14 months, picked up his keys, and walked out into the morning. He drove to the yellow house. Zoe was sitting on the front porch steps when he arrived, the yellow rain jacket again, watching him walk up the path with those steady, clear eyes. You came back, she said. I said I would, Daniel replied. Marcus is up, she said. He has been up since early. He kept asking if you were real. Daniel stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked at her for a moment. Why did you tell me? In the cemetery. You did not have to do that. Why did you? Zoe thought about it seriously, the way she seemed to think about everything, without hurrying toward the easy answer. Because he is a kid, she said, and kids do not deserve to be hidden. She looked at Daniel steadily. And because you kept coming back every Thursday, she said. Most people stop.
Daniel held her gaze.
What do you mean? She shrugged slightly. When people come to visit graves, she said, they usually come a lot at first and then less and less. But you came every single Thursday, same time, for a whole year. She looked at him with something that was not quite approval, but close to it. My daddy says that is what love actually looks like, she said. It does not disappear when it gets hard. It just keeps showing up. Daniel stood at the bottom of those porch steps in the October morning in Kingman, Arizona, in his leather cut with the Iron Saint's death head on the back, and he felt something move through him that was not grief and was not anger, but was something older and more fundamental than either of those things. Then he walked up the steps and went inside to see his son. Harlan Webb called back at 11:47 that morning. Daniel was sitting at Diane's kitchen table, watching Marcus eat a bowl of cereal with the focused attention of a child who had learned not to take meals for granted, and when the phone buzzed, he stepped out onto the back porch and answered it quietly, so Marcus would not hear the conversation through the window. The contact at the DA's office had looked at the documents, Harlan said. Not officially yet, but enough to form an opinion. The opinion was that what Harlan had brought them was not a domestic dispute or a civil matter or a family disagreement that belonged in a mediator's office. The opinion was that it was a criminal case with multiple felony components and that it was going to move faster than most because there was a child involved and a falsified death certificate on record and a suspended financial transfer that created a clear evidentiary trail. They want to bring you in for a formal statement, Harlan said. Today if possible. This afternoon. Daniel watched through the glass of the back door as Marcus finished his cereal and said something that made Diane's son laugh. I will be there, Daniel said. There is something else, Harlan said. His voice had the quality it got when the information was the kind that needed to be delivered, carefully. The facility where Marcus was placed, the Sunridge Care Center. I made a quiet call this morning to a former licensing inspector I know. He pulled their compliance history as a favor. Daniel waited. That facility has had 2 previous complaints filed against it in the last 5 years, Harlan said. Both involving irregular intake documentation. Both cases where children were admitted under guardianship arrangements that were later found to be legally questionable. Neither case resulted in prosecution because the children were eventually removed, and the facility's owner had a lawyer who was very good at making paperwork problems look like administrative errors. Daniel's muzzle tightened. They knew how to do this, he said. This was not Carol's first time using them. It was Carol's first time, Harlan said, but it was not the facility's first time accepting that kind of arrangement. Which means there is a pattern, and patterns are something prosecutors like very much. Daniel nodded even though Harlan could not see him. I will be at the DA's office at 2, he said. He went back inside and sat down across from Marcus. The boy looked up at him with those clear eyes that had always seen more than Daniel expected a child to see. Do you have to go somewhere? Marcus asked. For a little while, Daniel said. I will come back this afternoon. He looked at his son steadily. I need you to stay here with Diane and be good, okay? Marcus looked at him the way he used to look at him when he was checking the truth of something. Okay, Marcus said. But you are coming back. I am coming back, Daniel said. I am always coming back from now on. Marcus accepted this with a small nod and went back to his cereal, and Daniel watched him for a moment longer than was strictly necessary before he stood up and thanked Diane and walked out to his truck. He drove to the shop first. He needed to see Priest. Priest was under a customer's Road King when Daniel walked in, and he slid out from under it when he heard Daniel's boots on the concrete floor and looked at him for 2 seconds and said, "Sit down and tell me all of it." Daniel told him all of it. The financial motive, the falsified credentials, the facility's history, the suspended trust transfer, the DA contact, all of it. Priest listened without interrupting, which was one of the things that made him invaluable. He had the ability to hear a complete situation before he responded to any part of it. When Daniel finished, Priest was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The club needs to know." "Not yet," Daniel said. "Not until after the DA meeting. I do not want anything happening that gives Carol's lawyer a way to complicate the case. If 12 bikers show up at her house before the formal investigation is opened, her attorney turns this into a harassment narrative." Priest looked at him. "And after the DA meeting?" Daniel met his eyes. "After the DA meeting, everyone knows." Priest nodded once, which meant he accepted this, but was not entirely comfortable with it, which was exactly the position Daniel had expected him to take, and exactly the position Daniel needed him to stay in for a few more hours. Daniel changed out of his cut before he went to the DA's office. He put on a plain dark jacket over a clean shirt, not because he was ashamed of the cut, but because he understood that some rooms required a man to manage the information other people received about him before they had met him, and a man walking into a formal legal meeting in a motorcycle club vest was giving the people in that room a set of assumptions to overcome before he had spoken a word. He had learned this from 11 years of running a business in a world that made assumptions about men like him constantly. The investigator who took his statement was a woman named Vasquez, mid-40s, dark hair pulled back, the kind of calm that came from years of sitting across from people in difficult situations and knowing how to stay level while they weren't. She had a recorder on the table and a legal pad, and she asked her questions in a sequence that told Daniel she had already reviewed Harlan's documents carefully before he walked in. She asked him about the timeline, about the call from Carol, about the funeral arrangements, about the closed casket, about the hospital visit that had supposedly preceded Marcus's death, about the doctor whose name appeared on the death certificate. Daniel answered every question without elaboration and without emotion. He had learned in the army, briefly, before a knee injury ended that chapter, and later in years of managing complicated situations in complicated rooms, that the most effective way to deliver information that needed to be believed was to remove everything from it that was not information. When he had finished answering, Vasquez set down her pen and looked at him directly. "Mr. Morrow," she said, "I want to be clear with you about what we are looking at from our side." Daniel waited. "We have a falsified death certificate, signed using stolen medical credentials. We have a burial executed with no body and no hospital transfer documentation. We have a child placed in a facility under a false guardianship arrangement. We have a financial transfer initiated fraudulently from a trust account." She paused. "And we have a living child who has now been identified by his biological father and by multiple independent witnesses." She looked at him steadily. "This is not a borderline case, Mr. Morrow. This is a serious criminal matter with clear documentary evidence and a minor victim." Daniel said nothing. "We will be issuing warrants for the financial records and the facility documentation this afternoon," Vasquez continued. "We will be bringing Carol Morrow and Gerald Holt in for questioning within the next 24 hours. She looked at her legal pad. "I want to ask you something directly, and I want you to answer it directly." "Go ahead," Daniel said. "Is there any possibility," she said, "that your sister believed she was acting in the child's best interests? That this began as something other than premeditated fraud and became something worse through escalation?" Daniel thought about it honestly. The way he tried to think about everything that mattered. Carol had always believed she knew better than him, had always believed his life was unsuitable for a child, had told him so twice to his face. He did not think she was incapable of convincing herself that what she was doing was right, even while she was doing something that was wrong. But the financial transfer, he said, $240,000. That was not about Marcus's welfare. That was about money. You can tell yourself a lot of stories about why you moved a child, but you cannot tell yourself that the trust transfer was for the child's benefit. Vasquez nodded slowly. "That is the piece that eliminates the sympathetic narrative," she said. "Yes." She closed her folder. "We will be in contact, Mr. Morrow. In vain, do not contact your sister or her husband. Do not discuss the details of this conversation publicly. And keep your son somewhere stable and safe." "He is somewhere stable and safe," Daniel said. He stood up. "Thank you." He drove back to Diane's house. Marcus was in the backyard again. this time sitting on the grass with Zoe's younger brother. The two of them apparently engaged in some kind of complicated game, involving small rocks arranged in patterns that had their own logic. When Marcus heard the gate, he looked up and his face did the thing it had done that morning. That complicated slow waking, and then he stood up and walked over. "You came back," Marcus said. "I said I would," Daniel replied. Marcus looked at him. "Did you fix it?" he asked. "Working on it, Ace," Daniel said. "Almost." That evening Diane made dinner and all of them sat at the kitchen table together. Daniel and Marcus and Diane and her son and Raymond and Zoe. And it was the loudest and most full that table had probably been in a while. And Daniel sat in the middle of it and felt something he had not felt in 14 months. He felt like a person who had a future again. After dinner, Marcus fell asleep on the couch, with his head on Daniel's leg, while Daniel talked quietly with Raymond on the other side of the room. Raymond was a careful man who spoke carefully, but what he said carried weight in the way things do, when the person saying them has earned the right through patience and observation. "You know what I noticed most," Raymond said, "about the boy when he first came to us?" "What?" Daniel said. "He was not surprised that bad things had happened," Raymond said. "He was surprised that good things happened." He looked at his hands. He had been taught to expect the worst. But every time Diane did something kind, every time my Zoe included him, he looked like he was adding it up, like he was collecting evidence that the world was not entirely what he had been told. Daniel looked at his son sleeping against his leg. "He kept all of it," Raymond continued. "Every small thing. He told me once that when you find out your father did not really leave you, you are going to need a lot of proof that good things are real." He said he was collecting proof. Daniel did not respond immediately. He put his hand on Marcus's shoulder and was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm going to give him a lot more proof." Raymond nodded. "Yes," he said, "I believe you will." The call from Priest came at 7 the next morning. Daniel was already up, already dressed, already standing in Diane's kitchen with coffee, Marcus still asleep in the back room. "Harlan just called me," Priest said. His voice was the voice he used when information was moving fast, and he was managing his own reaction to it. "They picked up Carol and Gerald last night. Warrants went through faster than expected because of the financial component. The bank flagged the trust transfer to the fraud unit 3 weeks ago, and the DA already had an open inquiry. Your case connected directly into an existing investigation." Daniel set down his coffee cup. "They already had something on them," he said. "Not on Carol specifically," Priest said. "On the facility, the Sunridge Care Center. The licensing investigator that Harlan contacted apparently had more than a compliance history. He had been building a referral case. Private placements of children through informal channels. Money moving between certain lawyers and certain medical contacts and certain care facilities in a way that suggested a network rather than isolated incidents." Daniel went very still. "Marcus was not the only one," he said. "Harlan does not have a number yet," Priest said. "But no, probably not. The DA is treating Carol and Gerald as participants in a larger structure rather than the architects of an independent crime, which means the charges are going to be more complex but also more serious." Daniel looked toward the hallway where Marcus was sleeping. "There is something else," Priest said. He paused in the way he paused when he was choosing how to say something. "Carol called the shop this morning. Before I knew any of this. She said she needed to talk to you. She said it was about Marcus. Said she knew you had found him, and she wanted a chance to explain before things went further." Daniel was quiet. "I told her you would call her back," Priest said. "I did not tell her what I knew. I did not tell her about Harlan or the DA. I just said I would pass the message." "You did the right thing," Daniel said. "Are you going to call her?" Priest asked. Daniel looked at the hallway again, at the closed door behind which his son was sleeping in a borrowed room in a stranger's house because his own aunt had erased him from his life for $240,000 and a theory about what kind of home a child deserved. "No," Daniel said. Priest exhaled. "Okay. There is nothing she can say to me right now that I need to hear," Daniel said. "Everything she needs to say she can say to the DA. That is what the DA is there for." "Understood," Priest said. Then after a moment he said, "When do I tell the rest of the club?" "Tonight," Daniel said. "I want Marcus with me when I tell them. I want him to see the people who rode behind his father to his funeral and know who they are." Priest was quiet for a second. Then he said, "That is going to be a room full of grown men not keeping it together." "I know," Daniel said. "I am not going to keep it together," Priest said. "I know that too," Daniel said. He heard something move behind him and turned. Marcus was standing in the kitchen doorway in his socks and the red hoodie, his hair pushed flat on one side from the pillow. He looked at Daniel with sleepy eyes. "Who were you talking to?" he asked. "Priest." Marcus processed this. He rubbed one eye. Is Priest still at the shop? He is, Daniel said. Marcus thought about this. Can we go see him? Daniel looked at his son for a moment. Yeah, he said. We can go see him. He called Diane into the kitchen and explained briefly what had happened, the arrests, the expanded investigation, and enough for her to understand the shape of it without the full detail. Diane listened with her arms folded, and her face still in the way it went when she was processing serious information. When he finished, she said, "Are they going to stay in jail?" "The DA thinks so," Daniel said. "The combination of the financial fraud and the connection to the larger case makes bail complicated." Diane nodded slowly. "Good," she said. And then she said it again, quietly, like a period at the end of a sentence. "Good." Daniel thanked her for the third or fourth or fifth time in 2 days. And she told him to stop thanking her and bring Marcus back to visit when things settled down because her son would miss him. And Zoe would have opinions about everything that happened, that she would need to deliver in person. Daniel almost smiled. "He will be back," he said. "I promise." Marcus hugged Zoe before they left. It was the unself-conscious, full-bodied hug of a child who had learned over 8 months to trust her completely, and Zoe hugged him back with the matter-of-fact firmness of a girl who had decided some time ago that this was her friend, and that was simply how things were. "You are going to come back, right?" Zoe said. It was not quite a question. "My dad said I would," Marcus told her. Zoe looked at Daniel. "He going to keep his word?" "He is," Daniel said. Zoe considered this and then nodded once, which felt more like official approval than a casual gesture. "Okay," she said. "Good." They drove to the shop in the morning light, Marcus in the passenger seat holding the small red boat that Daniel had retrieved from his house that morning, the one Marcus had been given for his 5th birthday, and that had sat on his bedroom shelf since the day Carol called from Flagstaff with her false, terrible news. Marcus held it in his lap with both hands and looked at it. "I thought I would never see this again," he said. "I kept it exactly where you left it," Daniel said. Marcus ran his thumb along the painted hull. "Did you go in my room?" he asked. "Sometimes," Daniel said honestly. Marcus looked at him. "Did you talk in there?" Daniel kept his eyes on the road. "Sometimes," he said. Marcus nodded like this was the correct answer to a question he had been carrying for a while. "I talked to your jacket," he said. "The one you left at Aunt Carol's house before everything happened. They moved me before I could take it with me." He paused. "I talked to it at night." Daniel said nothing for a moment. The desert moved past the truck windows, flat and golden wide. "What did you say to it?" Daniel asked. Marcus thought about it. "I told it that you were going to figure out what happened," Marcus said. "I told it that you were not the kind of person who just stopped." He looked out the window. "I told it that when you found me you were going to be really mad." Daniel glanced at him. "I am," he said. "I know," Marcus said. "But not at me." "Not at you," Daniel confirmed. "Not even close to at you." Marcus seemed to settle slightly at that, something releasing across his shoulders. Then he said, "Is Priest going to cry?" "Probably," Daniel said. Marcus looked satisfied. "He cried at my birthday party too," he said. "The one where you got the big cake." "That cake had sparklers on it," Daniel said. "Priest has a thing about sparklers." Marcus almost smiled. "That is kind of funny for someone so scary looking." "Do not tell him that," Daniel said. "I know," Marcus said. "I am not dumb." Daniel did look at him then, briefly, before returning his eyes to the road. "No," he said, "you are really not." They pulled into the lot behind Iron Saint Cycle Works, and Daniel cut the engine, and they sat for a moment in the parked truck, the way they used to sit sometimes at the end of a ride before going inside. That particular comfortable silence that exists between people who do not need to fill every space with words. "Ready?" Daniel said. Marcus looked at the back door of the shop. Then he looked at his father. "Yeah," he said. He opened the truck door and got out, still holding the red boat. Daniel got out on his side, and they walked to the shop door together, and Daniel pushed it open, and the smell of oil and metal and the particular warm mechanical air of a working shop came out to meet them, and Marcus breathed it in the way you breathe in something you have been away from for long enough that coming back to it feels like a physical event. Priest was at the workbench. He turned when he heard the door. For a moment he just stood there, looking at the boy standing next to Daniel, holding a small red boat. Priest was not a man who made noise when he was hit by something. He went very still instead, the way a large structure goes still when something fundamental shifts inside it. Then he walked across the shop floor and he got down on one knee in front of Marcus, and he looked at him for a long moment. "Hey, Ace," Priest said. His voice was not entirely steady. "Hey, Priest," Marcus said. Priest put both hands on Marcus's shoulders and looked at him like he was confirming something that his logical mind had not entirely accepted yet, despite all the evidence. Then he pulled the boy into a hug that Marcus disappeared into completely, and Priest closed his eyes and was quiet for a moment. Daniel stood back and let it happen. Cole, the prospect, had come out of the back when he heard the door, and was standing near the parts shelf saying nothing, his face doing something complicated. When Priest straightened up, he looked at Daniel. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Daniel nodded once. Priest nodded back. Marcus looked between them. He has been like that my whole life, he told Priest, indicating Daniel. He does that thing with his head instead of talking. I know, Priest said, and something in his voice had recovered its steadiness. I have been dealing with it for 9 years. It is annoying, Marcus said. Extremely, Priest agreed. Daniel looked at both of them. I am standing right here, he said. Marcus and Priest exchanged a look that was the look of two people who had known each other since the smaller one was old enough to have opinions, and Marcus said, we know. And Priest said, we know, at almost exactly the same time. And Daniel Morrow, who had not felt anything close to this in 14 months, felt it now, the full weight and warmth of it, the irreplaceable specific feeling of standing in a room with people who were yours. He had built this, he thought. This shop, this club, this circle of people. He had built it from nothing after the divorce, after the years of uncertainty, after every person who had told him that a man who rode motorcycles and ran a small shop in Kingman, Arizona, was not building anything worth having. He had built it, and someone had tried to take the most important piece of it away from him. They were not going to walk away from that without consequences. Not Carol, not Gerald, not the facility, not anyone who had touched a single document that had moved his son away from his life. But that was for later. That was for the case and the warrants and the investigators and the long work of making the truth formally, legally, publicly undeniable. Right now, his son was standing in his shop holding a red boat, and Priest was showing him something under the hood of a customer's bike and explaining what a camshaft was, and Cole was handing Marcus a clean rag and showing him how to check oil the way Daniel had taught Cole when he first came on, passing it down without being asked. Right now, this was enough. That evening, the full club gathered at the shop. 12 members of the Iron Saints MC, men who had ridden behind a sealed coffin 14 months ago, believing they were paying their final respects to a boy they had all in their own ways helped raise. Men who had sat with Daniel in the months that followed in the particular silent, loyal way of people who do not have the right words but show up anyway. Daniel stood in the center of the shop with Marcus beside him. He did not make a speech. He was not a man who made speeches. He said, "You all know why you are here," and then he said, "This is Marcus. He is alive. He has been alive this whole time." The room was the kind of quiet that has mass. Then a man named Dutch, the oldest member of the club, a Vietnam veteran with a white beard and forearms like dock rope, made a sound that was not quite a word and crossed the room and put his hand on top of Marcus's head the way old men do when they are trying to hold something precious without breaking it. Then the room was not quiet at all. Later, after Marcus had fallen asleep, in Daniel's office on the old couch that had been there since the shop opened, the men sat around the open garage in the cool October night, and Daniel told them the full story. All of it, from the cemetery to Zoe to Raymond's notes to Harlan's investigation to the arrests. When he finished, there was a long silence. Dutch spoke first. "What do you need from us?" he said. Daniel looked at the men around him. These were not men who asked permission to act. They were men who had to be given a direction, or they would find their own. He understood that, and he respected it. And he also understood that the direction he gave them tonight mattered. "What I need from you," Daniel said, "is to let the law handle the law part." He looked around the circle deliberately, meeting each set of eyes. "I know that is not the instinct. I know every man here wants to do something that feels more immediate. But I have a case that is solid, and I have investigators and a DA, and I have Harlan, and if anything happens outside of that process, Carol's lawyer turns around and uses it." He paused. "My son deserves to see this done properly. He deserves to see that the truth wins on its own, without us having to force it." Another silence. Then Priest said, "And after the law handles the law part?" Daniel looked at him. "Then I will let you know if there is anything left to handle." A few of the men smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of people who were satisfied with a plan. Dutch nodded once. "We ride with you," he said. "Whatever it comes next. Same as always." Same as always, the rest of them confirmed, in the uneven overlapping way of a group of men who were not saying words but making a statement. Daniel looked at the door to his office where his son was sleeping. "Same as always," he said. Daniel Morrow walked into the Mojave County Courthouse on a Tuesday morning in November, with Priest on his left and Harlan Webb on his right, and 12 members of the Iron Saints MC standing in a line behind him, like a wall that had learned how to wear leather. They did not come inside the courtroom. Daniel had asked them not to. but they stood on the courthouse steps in the cold morning air, cuts on their backs, hands in their pockets, and every person who walked past understood, without being told, that these men were there for a reason, and that the reason mattered to them completely. Inside, the hearing was not long. The case that Harlan and Vasquez had built over the preceding weeks was the kind of case that does not require drama in the courtroom, because the documents do all the talking. Falsified death certificate, stolen medical credentials, cash payment to a funeral home for a burial with no body, fraudulent guardianship transfer, a financial transaction of $240,000, initiated 4 days after a child was declared dead by a certificate that was constructed entirely from lies. Carol sat at the defense table in a gray blazer with her lawyer beside her. She looked smaller than Daniel remembered. Not physically smaller, but reduced in some essential way, like a structure that had been holding itself up through pressure, and now that the pressure was known and named, it had nothing left to brace against. Gerald sat beside her and stared at the table. Daniel sat in the gallery and watched and said nothing. When the judge reviewed the evidence summary and confirmed that the charges would proceed to trial, Daniel heard Carol make a sound beside her lawyer, a small compressed sound that might have been a word, or might have been something that never made it that far. He did not look at her. He looked at the judge, and he looked at the documents, and he looked at the recorder on the clerk's table, and he let the formal structure of the room do what formal structures exist to do. Outside afterward, Priest fell into step beside him as they walked down the steps toward the street. "How are you?" Priest said. Daniel thought about it honestly. "I am okay," he said. "I thought it would feel different, bigger." Priest nodded. "It is not the ending," he said. "It is just the part where the ending becomes official." Daniel looked at the street ahead. Marcus was at Diane's house. Daniel had decided not to bring him today, not because he was protecting him from the truth, but because a courthouse was a difficult room for a child, and there would be time later, when Marcus was older, to understand the full shape of what had happened and what had been done to correct it. He would understand enough of it already. Children always understood more than the adults around them expected. They walked to the parking lot, and Daniel stopped beside his truck and looked back at the courthouse building for a moment. "She really believed it," he said. Not out loud exactly, but to Priest, who was standing close enough to hear. Priest said nothing, waiting. "She really believed she had the right," Daniel said. "That is the part I keep coming back to. Not that she lied. That she lied, and somewhere underneath it, she had convinced herself she was correct." Priest looked at the courthouse. "Some people," he said, "build a story about themselves that they will do anything to protect, even when the story requires them to erase a child." Daniel nodded slowly. The trial was 4 months away. There would be more hearings, more documents, more formal procedures. Vasquez had told him the facility case had expanded to include 3 other families, whose children had been placed through the same informal network of contacts and payments. Those families were now being located and notified. The full scope of it was larger than Carol and Gerald, larger than one falsified death and one redirected trust fund. It was a system that had operated in the spaces between official oversight and dismantling. It was going to take time and careful work. Daniel was prepared for that. He had the patience for long, careful work. 11 years of running a business had given him that. He drove to Diane's house, and Marcus was at the kitchen table doing homework, a worksheet of multiplication problems that he was completing with the aggressive focus of a child who had decided to be good at something and was not going to stop until he was. Zoe was beside him reading a library book with equal focus and not speaking, which Marcus had told Daniel was one of the things he liked most about her, that she did not feel the need to fill silence with noise. "How did it go?" Diane asked quietly from across the kitchen. "It is moving forward," Daniel said. "It will take time." Diane nodded. She handed him a cup of coffee without asking if he wanted one, because she had learned in 2 weeks that he always wanted one. Daniel sat at the table across from the 2 children. Marcus looked up from his worksheet. "Did the judge say yes?" he asked. "Yes," Daniel said. "It is going to trial." Marcus looked at the worksheet for a moment. "Is Aunt Carol going to say sorry?" he asked. Daniel thought about how to answer that honestly. "I do not know," he said. "She might. But a sorry does not change what happened. The trial changes what happens next." Marcus considered this. "Like when you break something," he said. "Saying sorry does not fix the thing. You still have to fix the thing." "Exactly like that," Daniel said. Marcus nodded and went back to his multiplication. Zoe turned a page in her book without looking up and said, "That is what my daddy says too." Daniel looked at her. "Your daddy is a smart man," he said. "I know," Zoe said. 3 days later, Daniel brought Marcus home, not to Diane's house, which had been safe and warm and had given his son 8 months of stability that Daniel would never stop being grateful for. Home to the house on Creosote Lane, where Marcus had lived the first 6 years of his life, where his bedroom still had the same blue paint on the walls and the same drawing taped above the desk, stick figures in front of a square house with a sun in the corner. Marcus stood in the doorway of his bedroom for a long moment. "You did not change anything," he said. He said it the same way he had said to her the first time, in the same tone, like he was confirming something he had hoped was true, but had not quite let himself count on. "I did not change anything," Daniel said from the hallway behind him. Marcus walked in slowly and touched the edge of the desk and looked at the shelf and the books and the small cluster of things that had been his. He set the red boat on the desk carefully, in the same place it had always been. Then he turned around and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at his father. "I want to go back to school here," he said. "At my old school." Daniel leaned against the doorframe. "I already called them," he said. "You start Monday." Marcus nodded. He looked at the drawing above the desk, the stick figures. He was quiet for a moment in the way he was quiet when he was working through something. "Dad," he said. "Yeah. I am not mad at you," Marcus said. "I was for a little while, when I thought you knew where I was and did not come. But Zoe told me that being mad at the wrong person is a waste of time." He paused, so I stopped. Daniel looked at his son. "What Zoe said is right," he said. "But if you had been mad at me, I would have understood it." "I know," Marcus said, "but it would not have been fair." He looked at the red boat. "You came when you found out. That is what matters." Daniel sat down on the edge of the bed beside his son. There was a long, comfortable silence between them, the kind that had always existed when they were in the same room together, built over 6 years of proximity and trust. "I am going to do better," Daniel said. "The shop is still going to be there. The rides are still going to happen. But you are first. You were always supposed to be first, and I let the days get too long and the trips get too frequent, and I should not have." Marcus looked at him seriously. "You can still ride," he said. "I like the rides." "I know," Daniel said. "We will ride together." Marcus almost smiled. "I want my own bike eventually," he said. "You are 6, Daniel said. "I know," Marcus said. "Eventually." He said the word carefully, like he had been saving it for the right moment. "When I am older." "When you are much older," Daniel said. Marcus looked satisfied with this answer. "Okay," he said. They sat together on the edge of the bed in the blue room for a while longer, the red boat on the desk, the drawing on the wall, the afternoon light coming through the window, the way it always had. Outside, the desert wind moved through the creosote, and the October air was cold and clear all the way to the horizon. In the weeks that followed, the Iron Saints rode, not for any particular destination. They rode because riding was the language they used when words were insufficient, when something had happened that was too large for a room, and needed open road and speed, and the collective roar of engines to be properly acknowledged. They rode through the high desert north of Kingman, with Marcus in front on Daniel's tank, the boy's hands on the bars, and the wind hitting him full in the face, and his mouth pulled into the same grin from the photograph, the real one, the one that had lived in Daniel's pocket through 14 months of a grief that turned out to be a lie. Dutch rode at the back the way he always did. Priest rode at Daniel's right shoulder the way he always did. The Deathheads moved through the desert in formation, and the sound of them together was the sound of something that had been broken being declared whole again, loudly and without apology, the way the Iron Saints did everything. On a Friday evening 2 weeks after Marcus came home, Raymond and Diane and Zoe and her brother came to the shop for what Daniel had told them was a small dinner, and what turned out to be the Iron Saints' version of a small dinner which involved a full pig on a spit, 3 cases of cold drinks, a speaker system that the neighbors 2 streets over could identify by name, and every member of the club plus their families filling the lot behind the shop with noise and light, and the particular boisterous warmth of people who have decided that something is worth celebrating properly. Raymond sat in a lawn chair near the fire with a cold drink in his hand and watched the proceedings with the expression of a man who has seen a great deal of the world and is presently witnessing a part of it he had not expected. Zoe stood beside him and watched Marcus run through the lot with 4 other children, pursuing some objective that only children understood, the red boat tucked under his arm like a football. "My daddy says this is what justice looks like," Zoe told Raymond. Raymond looked at the lot, at the bikes lined up gleaming in the firelight, at Daniels standing near the shop door, talking to Priest with a bottle in his hand and something on his face that had not been there 14 months ago. "Your daddy," Raymond said, "is right about most things." Zoe nodded. "I know," she said. "I told him that." Raymond almost smiled. "What did he say?" Zoe shrugged. "He said I was biased." Raymond did smile then, a slow, full smile. He looked at the fire for a moment. Then he looked at his granddaughter, this small, steady girl in her yellow jacket, who had stood in a cemetery, and told a grieving man the truth because a child was hiding in it, and she had decided that was not acceptable. You did a good thing, he said quietly. Zoe watched Marcus catch up with the other children and hold the red boat above his head in triumph. I just told the truth, she said. Same as always. Raymond put his arm around her shoulders.
Yes, he's same as always.
Across the lot, Marcus looked up from the game and found Daniel with his eyes the way he had done since he was old enough to walk into a room and check that his father was still in it. Daniel raised his bottle slightly. Marcus raised the red boat. Then the music got louder and the fire got brighter. And the Iron Saints MC filled the October night with the sound of people who had come through something together and were still standing, which in their world was not a small thing. It was everything.